At my mother's funeral, my mother-in-law wore a grin as she declared, "This house will be inherited by my son." Contemplating which room to take, she remarked, "I wonder if I should choose this one." Politely, I corrected her, stating, "Actually, I'm the one inheriting this house." Unfazed, she retorted, "I know, but isn't it true that a wife's belongings belong to her husband? So in essence, this house belongs to my son, right?" I sighed, questioning the validity of her claim. Cheerfully, she added, "From now on, let's get along." Hesitating, I asked, "What do you mean by get along?" She declared, confidently turning this room into my room. I inquired, "Does that mean we'll be living together?" Without hesitation, she replied, "Exactly." With such a splendid house, it'd be a waste to have empty rooms when two people can live here. Don't you think? Despite my recent loss, my mother-in-law seemed blissfully unaware of my grief. Why would she bring this up now? Can't she see the sadness on my face? It's no time for jokes. This house holds precious memories, built by my respected father and cherished by my late mother. I don't want my unreasonable mother-in-law to live here. My husband, who doesn't stop her, is equally at fault for preventing my precious home from being tainted. I decided to take the initiative before moving out. I am a 42-year-old office worker, having missed the timing for marriage and still being single after turning 40. I had given up on the idea of getting married. However, through an acquaintance's introduction, I met Michael, who is 4 years younger than me, and we were able to get married. My husband is a kind person who prioritizes my opinions. "Where should we go for our honeymoon?" I asked. "You mentioned that Europe would be nice, right? But didn't you say you preferred the Maldives?" I added. "Let's go to the Maldives," my husband replied. "My mom wants to live with us. My dad's health isn't great, and it seems my mom is finding it challenging to manage alone," he explained. "I understand that your mom is going through a tough time, but didn't we agree not to live together before we got married?" I questioned. "You're right. I'll talk to my mom about it," my husband said. My husband always listens to my whims, and I often feel guilty about it. Meeting a good person is a joy, but there's one regret. My father passed away 3 years before I got married, so I couldn't show him my wedding and reassure him. My father was a strict executive at a small and medium enterprise, and I deeply respected him. Despite the modest size of the company, his income was decent, and our family home was sizable enough to hold a funeral. As I began working as an office employee, I gained a deeper understanding of the challenges of work, which only increased my admiration for my father. Then 2 years after our marriage, my mother also passed away. Even my mom, my husband asked, "Are you okay? Shouldn't you take a break in the back room?" Funerals are generally less commonly held at home, but my mother's funeral was conducted at home. During my mother's funeral, my husband always looked out for me. Truly, I was fortunate to have met such a good husband. That's when my mother-in-law, Nancy, arrived. "My deepest condolences. I sincerely sympathize with you," she said. I replied, "Thank you." I hadn't lived together with my mother-in-law, and our interactions had been limited, maintaining a reasonable distance. However, it was during my mother's funeral that I glimpsed her true nature. Following the funeral, my mother-in-law approached me. While it was not uncommon for her to seek me out, her expression carried an oddly gleeful tone. "We greatly appreciate your assistance during this funeral. Thanks to you, we were able to smoothly complete the ceremony," she expressed appreciatively. Then abruptly she added, "The funeral is over now. Isn't it enough with the formalities?" I was taken aback. I thought she was initially trying to be considerate of my grief, but it soon became evident that wasn't the case. Commenting on the splendid house my parents had, I replied, "Wait a moment." Undeterred, she boldly walked into the depths of the house. I protested, "Oh, Mom, this is inconvenient. Some areas are messy." Dismissing my concerns, she declared, "Don't fuss over details. More importantly, this house will be inherited by my son." "I wonder if I should take this room," she said, hesitating. I tried to clarify, "Mom, actually, I'm the one inheriting this house." Smirking, she responded, "I know. Your parents didn't have any other children, right? And isn't a wife's belongings her husband's? So, in essence, this house belongs to my son, doesn't it?" I sighed, questioning the validity of her claim. Cheerfully, she added, "From now on, let's get along." My hesitation prompted her to confidently declare, "I mean, turning this room into my room." Concerned, I asked, "Does that mean we'll be living together?" Without hesitation, she replied, "Exactly." I'd decided, with such a splendid house, it'd be a waste to have empty rooms when two people can live here. Finally, I won't have to take care of my husband all by myself. Unfortunately, my mother had recently passed away, and yet my mother-in-law was making such statements. I became increasingly angered, wondering why she would joke around at a time like this. Just as my conversation with my mother-in-law seemed to catch my husband's attention, he intervened. "Mom, what are you saying? This isn't the right time for such discussions," he scolded. Undeterred, my mother-in-law retorted, "Why make such a fuss?" Firmly, my husband insisted, "Just leave." He escorted her out of the house, apologizing, "Sorry, my mom can be unreasonable." Grateful for my dependable husband, I replied, "It's fine. Thanks to you for handling it." Yet in the days that followed, I would come to realize that my husband's perspective on scolding my mother-in-law was subtly different from my own. 10 days after my mother's funeral, as things settled down a bit, we decided to discuss the fate of my family home. Unexpectedly, my husband made a proposal. "This apartment is cramped. Shouldn't we move back to my parents' house?" I suggested, "Agreed, yeah, you're right. With more belongings and the possibility of having kids, it's better than squeezing into this tiny apartment." Then hesitantly, he concluded, "Well then, we should start preparing for the move." I had a pressing matter to discuss about the move. "What's the matter?" I inquired. He hesitated before revealing, "Considering the spacious house and all the empty rooms, I thought maybe my parents could move in with us." Stunned, I questioned, "Are you suggesting we live together?" Recently, I had noticed a change in my husband. Despite thinking he prioritized my opinions, I now wonder if he's merely a yes man, or even a pushover. His compliance with my mother-in-law's requests and his suggestion of living together make me question his true stance. Despite my repeated objections to cohabitation, he persists, seemingly prioritizing her over me. "Haven't I said it repeatedly? We won't live together," I reminded him. He responds, "But Mom keeps insisting on it." I counter, "During the funeral, you scolded her, didn't you? You stood up for me and opposed cohabitation." He admits, "Yes, I was upset about her barging into the house, but that doesn't mean I'm entirely against living together. I just thought such an important decision shouldn't be made casually in that setting." It was decisive. Despite nodding in agreement with my stance, he seems more inclined toward my mother-in-law. Moreover, he avoids making definitive decisions, maintaining a certain distance. Perhaps unconsciously, he believes he remains neutral. People like him can be tricky, convincing themselves of their neutrality and decision-making abilities. It's frustrating. I oppose living with someone who barged into my parents' house on the day of the funeral and suggested living in a particular room. I won't change my stance. Please convey this to your mom, I insist. He responds, why? You seem really bothered by it. Fine, I'll let her know. Well, I had mentally prepared for the possibility of living with my in-laws when we got married. Witnessing my mother-in-law's behavior during my mother's funeral changed my perspective. Living together in the cherished home my father built is now unthinkable, especially considering my husband's lack of assertiveness when he conveyed my opposition to cohabitation. My mother-in-law directly protested, calling me, "Why are you opposing cohabitation when there's such a spacious house? You're Michael's wife now, and his father and I are your parents, right? Why such strong opposition to living together with us?" I reiterated my decline for cohabitation, explaining my husband's mobility issues and the challenges I face alone. She accused me of abandoning them, prompting me to remind her of the reasons my husband had shared. Despite feeling sorry for my father-in-law's health, I can't ignore the possibility of everything related to him being pushed onto me if we were to live together. If we consider cohabitation a significant improvement in my husband and mother-in-law's mindset, it is a non-negotiable requirement. A few days after my mother-in-law labeled me heartless, my husband surprised me by rearranging the living room, moving furniture around to create space. Intrigued, I asked, "What are you doing? Is this for storing moving boxes?" He responded, "No, I'm planning to make space for 2 beds here." The mention of 2 beds filled me with dread. Cautiously, I asked, "Are your parents coming to stay?" To my dismay, he replied, "No, they're moving in today." Even before the actual move, the realization hit me. Despite my objections, my husband and mother-in-law were forcing cohabitation upon me. Why is this happening? I questioned, feeling a growing sense of frustration. He explained, "Their lease is up, so we decided they'd move here without renewing it. It'll be cramped for 4 people, but we're moving soon, right? Just bear with it for a little while." Distressed, I reiterated, "That's not what I meant. Why is cohabitation even on the table?" I said it before, I don't want to live with someone who barged into my parents' house on the day of the funeral and suggested living in this room. "I'll make sure to talk to Mom," he responded. "We'll be living together from now on, so please get along." Annoyed, I questioned, "Why do you prioritize everything your mom says?" He clarified, "It's not about prioritizing her. I listened to both of your opinions and made a judgment." However, my husband, when it came to my mother-in-law, seemed to have fallen for her cohabitation strategy, unwittingly swayed by her. He believed he was making independent judgments. I used to see him as kind, but when paired with my mother-in-law, he became a handful, forcing me into cohabitation with my in-laws. As we welcomed my in-laws into our cramped apartment, my mother-in-law began complaining about the living conditions. Apologizing for the sudden addition of 2 elderly people, I assured them we would endure until the move. However, my father-in-law, Tony, seemed polite, and it appeared he wouldn't be problematic. But subtle signs indicated he was following my mother-in-law's lead, becoming another yes man. Days later, my mother-in-law requested an errand to buy a medicated patch. Frustrated, I wondered why she made decisions without involving me in the conversation. Minor as it was, it raised concerns about potential future impositions. Living together seemed unsustainable with my in-laws. Preparing for their move to my parents' home, I decided to take preemptive action. As my mother-in-law expressed excitement about moving to the spacious house, I initiated behind-the-scenes preparations, determined to protect my parents' home. After about 10 uneventful days, I revealed my decision to renounce my inheritance, handing over the official court approval. I've decided to let go of the house. It holds immense sentimental value, and I couldn't bear the thought of you living there. I want to preserve it as a beautiful memory in my heart, I explained. My mother-in-law scolded, "What madness possessed you? Even if you were letting it go, you could have sold it for money. Why abandon the house?" I calmly explained, "Even if I sold it, you just rely on that money." Next, I thought it'd be clearer if I simply had nothing. She retorted, "We moved out of our previous place for this move. What are you doing? How will you make it up to us?" Firmly, I stood my ground. I consistently opposed cohabitation, yet without proper discussion, you forced it upon me. So I took a firm stance. Both my husband and mother-in-law seemed stunned upon learning about my renunciation of inheritance. Their faces drained of color, and they were left speechless, their strength sapped. My father-in-law looked bewildered as he observed the two of them. However, I wasn't about to let up. "Michael," I continued, "I've been thinking about getting a divorce. What do you think?" My husband stammered, "Divorce." My mother-in-law chimed in, "Michael, you should divorce this ridiculous wife immediately." I had expected her immediate demand for divorce, wanting to confirm whether my husband could make an independent decision at this critical moment. "Mom," my husband mumbled, but his response was still pending. My resolve to proceed with the divorce had solidified. "Fine, divorce is the only option," my mother-in-law snapped. My father-in-law interjected, "Michael, it can't be helped. Your mom insists." Seeing my husband's indecision, I pressed on. "Well, you seem to want a divorce too, and maybe that's for the best." Even insignificant decisions, my husband and father-in-law remained yes-men to my mother-in-law. Now my husband's words made it sound as if he had changed his opinion for my sake. "Very well," I declared. "Let's proceed with the divorce. I'll be moving out with minimal belongings." I spent the night at a budget hotel. Urgent matters awaited the next day, so I took half a day off work and headed back to the courthouse. A few days later, my mother-in-law called me, demanding answers. "What's going on? It seems that house is becoming yours. Why the sudden outburst? Did you find out through the estate division process?" "Yes, that house belongs to me," I replied calmly. "You forged documents and deceived us," she accused. I calmly refuted. "Why would I forge documents meant for court submission? Those are genuine." "Then why is the house becoming yours when you were supposed to renounce the inheritance?" I explained, "Well, right after that, I promptly withdrew the application. Renouncing an inheritance is difficult once accepted. However, it takes about a month for the renunciation application to be accepted, during which time it can be withdrawn at any point." The documents I showed my in-laws were not acceptance-related. They were from the application stage. I intentionally made them believe I had relinquished the house and confronted them with the prospect of divorce to gauge their reactions and decide my next steps. I didn't expect my mother-in-law's mindset to change, but I hoped my husband would reconsider and express that he didn't want a divorce. If he said he didn't want a divorce, I planned to rethink it and later explain about the house. However, my mother-in-law was determined. "So the house property division really becomes yours then. Since it was acquired before the divorce, it's subject to property division, right? In such cases, you two are supposed to split the money from selling it, don't you?" she pressed. My mother-in-law seemed determined to extract whatever she could, recognizing the house wouldn't be hers. However, I had foreseen this. If that house were jointly acquired, it would indeed be considered property. However, it's a unique asset acquired through inheritance, exempt from property division. Unfortunately, specific assets like this aren't eligible for division. She persisted, "What about the money that would come to Michael through property division?" I calmly responded, "We've only been married for a few years, so there's hardly anything substantial. Maybe just the car, although there's still an outstanding loan on it." Accusing me of selfishness, she called me heartless and declared, "I'm protecting that house because it holds precious memories of my parents. I don't want people like you living there. If you have any further complaints, please go through a lawyer." After the call with my mother-in-law, the divorce proceedings progressed smoothly. Presumably, she urged my husband to expedite the divorce. Regardless, the divorce was finalized, and I was free from the burden of dealing with my in-laws. I felt a sense of relief, as if I had successfully shielded my father's home from harm. After I moved out, my former in-laws spent some time in the apartment where my ex-husband and I used to live. Despite one less person, the small space likely felt cramped. My former mother-in-law explored new housing options, but their age posed challenges in passing rental application screenings. Consequently, my ex-husband opted to rent a smaller single-family home for them. Although it's smaller, being a house, the rent is likely higher than the apartment. He also assumed the responsibility of supporting his parents. My ex-husband faces a challenging life ahead. Initially excited about moving into the large house my father left behind, my former mother-in-law now settles for a considerably smaller home, likely leaving her disappointed. As for me, I've embarked on a new chapter in the house my parents left me. It radiates warmth, as if my parents are still present. If you enjoyed the story, consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time.